listening to the Paul McGUIRE Report, and I want to welcome all of you in the good old USA from the West Coast to the East Coast, North and South. I also want to welcome our listeners in the European Union, the Middle East, South America, and many nations and continents on planet Earth. Thank you for listening. You know, we've been able, because we have partners that help finance our outreach, we've been able to expand our social media outreach by expanding the number of alternative platforms we're on. And that has given us a real assistance in reaching Europe, for example. Now, I didn't know this. But somebody who's a key part of our ministry told me this, that some of these alternative social media platforms are heavily watched or listened to in the European Union and other geographic regions on planet Earth. So there was a cost in some of that, but it was well worth it because it means we can communicate our message to people in many different nations as well as the United States. This reminds me of a number of years ago when I was invited to speak by a large church in Paris, France. And when they invited me, I forgot how long it was when they actually invited me to the time I actually flew to Paris to speak. But what happened, like a week or two, I think it was a week before I spoke, it was a week before I spoke, the Charlie Hebdo terrorist attacks occurred. And so when I got to Paris, they had somebody from the church pick me up, and he was giving me a tour. The guy that worked at the church was a great guy, and he spoke fluent English, and obviously he spoke his native language, which was French. And so, because of the horror of what happened with the Charlie Hebdo attacks, there were still, the leftover of the mass demonstrations. There were signs everywhere. And I've put these up for you, by the way. And maybe I'll send them out to those. Maybe I'll send them out to those of you. Yeah, I think I'll do that. I'll send it out to those of you who subscribe. It's free. It's free. You're part of our mailing list for our Paul McGUIRE Ministries Prophecy News e-blast. And you have to go to paulmcguire.us, and it takes like 2 seconds. And you can receive this free, and we regularly mail out video, audio, all kinds of stuff. But I think I will mail out the pictures, the video and pictures I took in Paris, France. Because at night, those Charlie Hebdo demonstrations were still going on. And I was right at the center of that, and you could see, countless thousands. I mean, there were so many thousands of people. I have no idea what the number was, except that it was like massive. And many of you probably remember that sign that the French held up in the middle of that giant statue where the French people rallied, and the sign said "No fear." And I thought that was like very powerful and very impressive. No fear. That was the French's way of standing together in unity and rallying to the cause and not giving in to fear, which is what the terrorists wanted. On today's program, I want to talk about what's happening globally and nationally because they're directly connected. Every day for I don't know how long, I have been working countless hours finishing up my brand new book, Power from On High. And I deal with many things in Power from On High. But one of the themes, one of the most powerful themes that I believe that is in Power from High, which, by the way, you can pre-order now at paulmcguire.us. And if you pre-order it now, you get a financial discount. Now, that means you're pre-ordering it. So you get a financial discount, but we don't mail you the book until it's completed and printed. So, it's a win-win deal. You get it at a discount, and you also will get your copy mailed to you as soon as it comes off the printing press. You'll get your copy mailed to you, by a fast delivery rate. And you'll get your copy of the book before it's available to the general public. So, even though I know a lot of the material that I'm writing on, I have to constantly re-research and check things out. And, I want to tell a panoramic, large story. But you can't put everything in one single book. And I don't intend to do that. So then you have to chop out what you consider to be, the non-essentials and keep the good stuff. But one of the themes that quite frankly, I don't usually have any difficulty writing. It's just a gift that I have from God. So I don't have a difficulty in writing. In fact, most books I write, I overwrite by hundreds and hundreds of pages. And then I have to go back and chop out the stuff. It's the only way I can write. But because this concept, this truth that I'm trying to communicate to you, the reader, it's a very powerful truth. It's a revolutionary truth, by the way. It's a truth that if you understand it, not superficially, and I write my books in a way that they're easy to read, they're entertaining, and they're fast reads. And the thing that I try to specialize in is making complex topics simple and easy to understand for every kind of reader. Okay? But this one, and you might pray for me as I'm writing it, I'm serious about that. Your prayers are powerful. Every one of you that pray for me, this ministry, the people that work with this ministry in various capacities, every one of you who pray for us, my family, the outreach, myself, I want to tell you something. Not only can I feel your prayers, literally, I can feel them. Now, I don't know how accurate that is, but I can feel your prayers. And I cannot tell you over the decades, the countless times that we will be in intense spiritual warfare. And that's just part of the price of what happens when you tell the Lord you'll go to the front lines in the spiritual battle. You are in the front lines, literally, of a spiritual war. And, it's not easy. And there are all kinds of attacks that come down on you. I don't talk about those openly. But if I was to tell you what has happened just in the past year, this is just 1 year, and if I was to tell you the series of attacks that have been directed towards me personally and other things, if I was to share it with you, these are things that are not supposed to happen. Like freak things. When, we can say, okay, these freak things that happen to us in our lives are random, chance, and accidental. Okay, that's probably the way I would go too, if it was just one. But if we're talking, in a period of, like, say, 3 months, and in this period of 3 months, and I'm giving you an accurate report of what happens, I'm just going to leave out some details for obvious reasons. So in the last 3 months, the variety, well, actually 3 months and longer, the variety of spiritual attacks that have come all fall under the umbrella of it couldn't possibly have happened. In other words, just based on the laws of statistics and random chance and all that stuff, there's no way these freak things could have happened once. These are the kinds of things that never happen to people, or they might happen to you once in a lifetime. So I'm thinking about 2 spiritual attacks, okay? Not from people. I believe that they were spiritual attacks implemented by demons. No, I didn't see the demons. But what happened was freak things that just don't happen. And if they manage to happen once in a lifetime, which is what happened on one thing, I never, in my entire life, growing up, doing all kinds of stuff, I never experienced this kind of attack before. I'm talking about looking back on an entire lifetime. Not once did this freak thing ever happen to me. Okay? Now that's strange enough. And how it happened, I still don't know. Because what happened defies things like laws of gravity and all kinds of stuff. Okay? And I don't want to spell it out, but it's like when I analyzed it and looked at it, it's something that physically just should never have happened. Okay, so that's, to me, an alarm that there was something supernatural behind the attack. But then, 2 months later, I receive a similar attack, which impacts the ministry, and I want to leave it at that. And the negative impact is in the same once in a lifetime, but now it's twice within 2 months. A series of events that is statistically basically impossible. And I wish I could really get into the details, but I'm not going to do that, and I'll tell you why. We're on social media. All kinds of people are listening. It's on a need-to-know basis. So these were like things that should never have happened, but now they've happened twice. Okay, and then there are other things that should not have happened, but they happen. And you add up the amount of these things that happen in a short period of time, and you can't say, well, this happened basically out of logical, rational reasons. Because in every case, what made these attacks highly unusual was they just should never have happened. Events that are like 1 in 100,000. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, so why did these things happen? Well, we need to be sober-minded and discern, and we can't just overreact and attribute everything to the devil or demons. because that's a big mistake, and that can plunge you into the pit of paranoia. So I try to be restrained, analytical, logical, rational, as well as spiritually discerning. I'm not looking for a demon under every dinner plate. But as I analyzed the events, there was no question that they were so unusual and actually impossible in nature. Both were pretty much impossible in nature. They just don't happen. They've never happened to me. It probably never happened to you. And so I analyzed it, and I came to the conclusion that the attacks were caused by supernatural forces. Now, I want to say something that I believe will help you and clarify what I'm saying. I believe that any Christian who loves the Lord, any Christian who is born again, any Christian who, however imperfectly, is endeavoring to obey the Lord and serve the Lord with their life. When you do that, when you make that kind of commitment to Jesus Christ, you enter the spiritual warfare. And depending upon where your commitment is and a lot of other things, you may know whether you're volunteering to go to the front lines of the spiritual battle or not. And when but even just ordinary Christians who want to serve the Lord, you will find two things happen. First of all, God's supernatural blessing, His grace, His guidance, His anointing, His protection, and many other positive things come upon your life, your family's life, your children, your business, your job, your employment. That doesn't mean you're immune from adversity. You're not. But you're protected. But because you have chosen to get in the spiritual battle, you've entered a spiritual warfare, and you're going to experience, to whatever degree, trials, tribulations, and spiritual attacks. So my counsel and my advice to every Christian who truly seeks to serve the Lord in whatever capacity, you could be a housewife, a mother, a single mother. You could be unemployed and retired. And let me say something about retired. It is perfectly acceptable and all right if you have the financial resources to retire, and you've worked like a dog your whole life, or worked hard your whole life, and you want to unwind and do things that you never had the opportunity to do. That's perfectly all right. And don't misunderstand what I'm saying. I'm not trying to lay a false guilt trip on anybody. But as far as retirement goes, I believe you can please the Lord and still do those things. But I don't believe, in the larger sense of the word, that a true Christian or a true man or woman of God ever retires. That doesn't mean you can't change your schedule massively and incorporate many more relaxing, pleasurable activities. That's fine. Personally, I don't believe, and I'm not trying to lay a guilt trip on anybody, I don't believe a true Christian living under the Lordship of Christ can retire from their service to God. You can retire from your employment or business or whatever, but you cannot retire from serving the Lord. Because you're not on planet Earth right now, no matter what age you are. you're not alive and on planet Earth right now to be on 100% retirement. Otherwise, there's really no point in you living. And I'm not trying to sound cruel, because if all you're going to do is kick back and relax and retire, well, God just might as well take you home where you can totally unwind and relax and go to heaven. So it's obvious he has a purpose and a plan for you that has not yet been completed. And therefore, I don't believe true Christians retire. Now, you can substantially scale down activities and work, etc. But there are people for you to influence. There are people for you to pray for. There are things that God is calling any man or woman who's actually listening to God. There are things that God is calling you to do. I'm not talking about guilt where you got to slave away 12 hours a day and do nothing pleasurable. I'm not talking about that. But I look at my own life, and I've told the Lord this. I said, Lord, I do not want to go home until I have completed certain things and I've fulfilled my call. I do not want to go home before that. And the Lord knows that I mean there are still people that I feel that I am alive to influence, to pray for, and that it's not bragging, but I don't want to underestimate how important that is. There are still people you're called to pray for and influence. Family members, friends, other things. And then there's the subject of our nation, or whatever nation you live in. No true Christian can just hang out at the golf. I'm not knocking it if you like to play golf. Go play lots of golf. But if that's all you're doing, you're missing the mark. True Christians cannot just 100% spend every day on the golf course. Our nation is perishing. No, that's not negative. That's an accurate report card of exactly what's happening. So we're all here for a purpose. And I have a list of them. And if you listen to the Lord, he'll tell you. And most likely, most of you know what your purposes are. I told the Lord, don't take me home until the whole list of things, including the mere act of me talking to you now, is one of my purposes. I don't do this for vanity. I don't do this for ego. I'm doing this because I have an overwhelming love for God's people and you and my nation. And I want to do what I can in the most strategic and effective way to turn the tide of the spiritual battle. Because I have spent my life crying out to God, seeking God's face, studying his word, studying all kinds of areas like science and economics and government and law and medicine, and it goes on and on and on. And I believe with all my heart that there are certain things that God has called me to do. Now, whether those things happen, whether those things are successful or not, that's up to God. My job is to be faithful to the call that God gives me, just like you, and the results are up to him. I don't worry about the results because, you see, you and I don't produce the results anyway. We're just called to be faithful. And whether I am ever popularly received and applauded for what I've done, which sometimes I am. Most of the time I'm persecuted or attacked or ignored. I mean, even though I've been in ministry so many decades that I've known personally, and worked with and partnered with in the ministry with some of the greatest Christian leaders in the last 100 years. And I could drop names. You know some of them. I've mentioned them before. And all of these men, and these are great men of God, and you would know their names. They have publicly endorsed me over the years. They've publicly endorsed my ministry. And they were given similar burdens and visions from the Lord regarding our nation and what we're to do. So my greatest burden is this. Teaching God's people what to do, how to live, how to fulfill God's plan for their lives and their calling and assignments in the specific time period of now up until whenever it is when the Lord returns. Because I believe that is the most important focus for all of ministry, is that time period. And it's the one that's the most overlooked by Christians. What do we do? How do we fulfill God's ministry in this time period between now and whenever the Lord returns? And none of us, no matter how brilliant we think we are, knows when the Lord is going to return. So that's my burden, because I believe there's been a lot of false teaching, bad interpretation of the Word of God, and I believe, and I'm not, again, I do not like to be the critic of the Christian church. That is not something I enjoy. In fact, I don't like it at all. And believe me, I would rather never have to mention it or deal with it. It's not something that I like to do. But when you see God's people in the situation they're in today, and through 40 years of studying, when I look at what's happening today in America and around the world, I see that God's people are in the most dangerous place they have ever been in. That they are on the precipice of crisis, unprecedented crisis, chaos, destruction, persecution, and attacks. And yet, I see that the overwhelming percentage of God's people in America and around the world are completely clueless and oblivious to the severe danger that they're in, and the reason for that, and then how to deal with it. And the reason for that is that the overwhelming majority. This is not, I'm not just criticizing to be cute about it. The overwhelming majority of Christian ministers, pastors, seminary heads, seminary professors, Christian university professors, denominational heads, the heads of ministries, the overwhelming percentage of all these men and women in Christian leadership, the overwhelming percentage are either completely clueless about what is happening and what is going to happen in the future. They're completely clueless about the severity of the danger that they're in. Or, this is even worse, or they are secretly aware of the danger that we're in. And they've chosen to protect themselves by never standing up publicly and saying anything about it. So the end result is the leadership of Christians, the ministries, the seminaries, the universities, even the Christian high schools, the pastors, and so on and so forth, the ministry heads, they are not spiritually and practically equipping God's people on how to proactively deal with what's coming, how to survive it, how to overcome through it, how to be victorious through it. They're not taught how to recognize the way global demonic deception is being released into our nation and world. And so we have, and this, look, I'm going to tell you something. This breaks my heart. I cannot express to you in mere words, and this is not something that I conjured up, that I whipped myself into some kind of self-induced emotional frenzy. This does not come from Paul McGUIRE's humanness. You understand? I believe, without a doubt, this overwhelming spiritual burden, this overwhelming love for God's people, this overwhelming compassion and concern, this burden of the Holy Spirit has come into my heart, mind, and soul from the Holy Spirit of God Almighty. It has nothing to do with me. Because guess what, folks? I'm just like you. I don't have in my human carnal nature that degree of agape love, the love of God. Left to my own devices, my own human devices, apart from the Lord Jesus Christ. Make no mistake about it. If I was simply operating on my own human abilities and strength, God forbid, but most likely I would be like many of these pastors and seminary professors and university professors and ministry heads and Christian leaders. I would be like many of them, and I would be looking to protect my own you do know what, and that's what they're doing because the root sin is not their failure to communicate, teach, and equip God's people regarding the danger ahead. The root sin underneath that is they're operating their lives on reliance of their own human abilities, their own human love, their own human strength, etc., etc. And the greatest sin in the Bible, beginning in Genesis to Revelation, is whenever we attempt to counterfeit the Spirit of the Lord and the Spirit of Jesus Christ and God's love, whenever we attempt to counterfeit it or manufacture it out of our own flesh and humanness, it is always destined to fail. So the reason I'm telling you this is in the flesh, I am no better than anybody else. This is from the grace of God, period. Okay, so the Holy Spirit, the Bible talks about the love of God being shed abroad in our hearts. I didn't produce this compassion and this concern in myself. It's a product of the love of God shed abroad in my heart. You see, our hearts, get real, our hearts are empty. Our hearts are like hollow tombs. If we're looking to our human hearts to produce the love of God, our human hearts can't. Only the Spirit of the Lord can produce the love of God in our hearts. So when the love of God is shed abroad in our hearts, that compassion, that burden for God's people in a time of danger, that burden for God's children and grandchildren and so on and so forth, that burden for the nation you live in. For me, it's the United States of America. the burden, the concern, the weeping of the altar, coming before the Lord with a broken heart and weeping at the altar is not something that I am self-effort manufacturing. It is coming by unmerited favor and grace by the Spirit of God. Do you understand me? And what I'm talking about to you all over the world right now, and you should be spreading these messages far and wide as best you can. And may I say this, and you may not like it, you may not like me saying it, you may misunderstand me, and you may never listen to me again. But I'll have to run the risk because I have to tell you the truth, or my conscience isn't clean. First of all, I'm no better than anybody out there. I've already said that, but it needs to be said again. But second of all, many of you, not all of you, many of you do not have the love of God shed abroad in your heart. And that's the root reason why you don't have the compassion and the burden for your nation and the burden to save souls, etc., etc. But there are vast numbers of you listening right now, probably the greater percentage of you listening right now in America and around the world. I would say, from meeting you and reading your emails, etc., that the love of God has indeed been shed abroad in your hearts. And yes, you too carry the burden of the Lord, the burden for God's people, the burden for your nation, the burden for your children and grandchildren. You carry that burden and concern for the same reason I do. You're not producing it from your own flesh. It is a byproduct of the Spirit of the Lord at work in your life. So you know what I'm talking about. Okay, so when you do a minimum of reading and studying and research and listening to individuals who can teach you with integrity what's going on, you will quickly understand, because God will give you the ability to use the term, to be a fast study. That means you walk into a situation and you comprehend its meaning and understand it rather quickly. They call that person a fast study. Many of you are fast studies. You can assimilate this stuff quickly. Now, from all of my research, this is a lifetime of research. It goes back decades. In fact, as I've been finishing the book, Power from on High, I realized I had been saying that certain things happen in my life at 15 years old, and I realized, my God, no. I was 14 years old. I was 14 years old when I was demonstrating with the radical activist Abby Hoffman in massive demonstrations in New York City. Abby Hoffman's name has come into resurgence lately because Netflix, the movie entertainment channel, has been airing and re-airing. You can see it. You have Netflix, it's for free. The trial of the Chicago 8 or the Chicago 7, where Abby Hoffman, because he was a leader of this massive demonstration outside the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago, was on trial for, I forgot what the charge was. And so his name and the whole story of his life has come back in a way that has reached several new generations. So I was demonstrating with Abby Hoffman when I was 14 years old. How did that happen? It happened because I was raised in an atheistic household. I tell the story in my book, Power from On High. I was raised in an atheistic household as a secular humanist and as an existentialist. My parents were essentially anti-Christian, but my parents were, in many ways, very moral people. In some ways. I mean, in ways like being kind and loving people and telling the truth, they were highly moral. But their definition of morality in other areas was based on their humanistic, atheistic beliefs. So on Sunday mornings, we never went to church, ever. On Sunday mornings, our church service was to read the Sunday edition of the New York Times, which was the biggest edition of the New York Times every week, and it had the most interesting stories and photographs. And the New York Times at that time was heavily publicizing and reporting on Abbie Hoffman, who was easy for them to report on because he was a very charismatic figure who used the principles of showmanship in his revolutionary cause. And reporters like people that have pizzazz, that are interesting. And Abbie had tons of it. Abbie could have been a professional comedian. He made people laugh. Now, so I was reading about Abbie Hoffman all the time, starting probably at 13 years old, early 14 years old. So the New York Times would promote when his next demonstration was, and I'd get up early, get on the subway, and go to participate with him in demonstrations. And being a tenacious type of guy, I wanted to know what the real Abbie Hoffman was like. So I would always find a way to maneuver myself, even if the crowd had, 50,000 people. I would find a way to maneuver myself through the crowd and end up positioning myself, within 5 feet of Abbie Hoffman, and with Abbie Hoffman and his wife Anita Hoffman at that time. So, because I wanted to see what he was really like and how he really operated. And he was very clever, street smart, and savvy. Now, but I was naive. And one of the principles that I talk in my book, Power from On High, which you need to order, you get a financial discount if you pre-order it now at paulmcguire.us. One of the principles I began to learn early on, is that our brains have a built-in tendency to see what they want to see, believe what they want to believe, and hear what they want to hear. So, plus the naivete of being a 14-year-old, teenager, I didn't have the wisdom that somebody older may have had, or the discernment that somebody older may have had. And so I'm really wrestling with this chapter in terms of tightening it up. I'm trying to explain principles to you, the reader, and these principles will transform your life forever. Why? Because they're not principles, I would highly suspect, that you've ever been taught. Certainly not in the Christian church, because they're not teaching the full truth of the Bible, which means they're giving you a one-dimensional, deficient teaching of the Bible. Now, so I didn't have the ability to really understand the massive puzzle piece, the matrix of, if you will, of the illusory world that I was stepping into. Abbie Hoffman was a showman. And all these other counterculture leaders of this time, this was approximately 1967. I'm talking about people like Abbie Hoffman, Dr. Timothy Leary, the LSD guru, Harvard professor, who I had the opportunity to hang out with in the East Village when he was leading a group of followers into chanting Om. I think the name of the club that he was doing this in, as I recall, it was called the Electric Circus on St. Mark's Place. And right down on St. Mark's Place was a rock and roll concert hall known as the Fillmore East. You had the Fillmore East in the East Village, which I went to all the time, and you had the Fillmore West in San Francisco. And the promoter was Bill Graham, not Billy Graham, but Bill Graham. And so as a 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old kid, 17-year-old kid, I would go in the East Village, to hang out with people like Abbie Hoffman, Timothy Leary, Allen Ginsberg, the radical poet. I didn't know it, but at the same time, I'm attending lectures by the radical poet Allen Ginsberg. George Soros, the billionaire, is in some of the same meetings with Allen Ginsberg that I'm in. Now, George Soros is several generations older than I am. Nobody knew who he was back then. I could have been sitting right next to him, for crying out loud. I wouldn't have known who he was because nobody knew who he was back then. But it's very interesting. And this is the concept that I'm struggling with language that energizes and draws the reader in. I'm trying to explain this principle. And I need your prayers in doing this. Decades later, George Soros becomes this super billionaire, a key member of the globalist elite, and George Soros, through his numerous billion-dollar foundations, is one of the biggest financiers of radical demonstrations, radical groups, radical political causes. I mean, he invests hundreds of millions of dollars into these things. And so, it's highly likely I was sitting very near him or next to him in some of these Allen Ginsberg radical poet meetings. So Timothy Leary, Allen Ginsberg, and many other leaders of the counterculture would hang out in New York City's East Village. It was like the Haight-Ashbury area of San Francisco. But I didn't fully understand their true agenda, and I didn't fully understand the fact, I just assumed at face value, because of my naivete, that all these charismatic counterculture leaders who were my heroes as a young kid, who were flying all over the United States and the world to ignite this global counterculture revolution. I just assumed that they got their money from donations or who knows where. I did not at that time understand how to see through the matrix. I didn't understand at that time the secret source of their financing and the secret source of their organizational structure and the secret source of their positive media exposure. Now, as the decades go by, and I'm researched like a, well, I don't want to say fiend, that has a bad connotation, but I research with total commitment. I call my methodology of research, I call it the deep dive, and I explain what the deep dive means in the book. Okay, so, even though I'm a young guy, 14 years old, and I'm going to all these demonstrations and I'm meeting all these important countercultural leaders real close up, I don't really, at this point, quite understand the multidimensional nature of what is really happening. I'm just absorbing it at face value. But a principle starts to work in my life. And I believe that same principle works in a lot of your lives. It's just that nobody's taught you how to codify it, break it down, and identify it. And that's where I need your prayer, because I want to make this, it's not all that complex. It's just our society never talks about it. The Christian church never talks about it. The media certainly doesn't talk about it. The entertainment industry doesn't talk about it. The educational system doesn't talk about it. So it's a way of dumbing us down and coercively forcing us to think inside the tiny box of consciousness. Because if you can dumb people down and through programming train their minds to think inside the tiny box of consciousness, you can enslave them and control them. And I also explain that in the book, Power from On High. So, one day I get up early and I go to a demonstration in Central Park, New York, that Abbie Hoffman is leading. It may have been what they called the Human Being, Human B-IN, Human Be-In demonstration that had tons of major rock and roll bands. It had lots of counterculture speakers like Abbie Hoffman, Timothy Leary, Paul Krasner of Ramparts magazine, Allen Ginsberg, and all kinds of people, and famous rock bands. I mean, big ones. And I arrive early, and I managed to find relatively easily, because I trained myself to do this. You know, all of Central Park is jammed with people for this counterculture celebration. And I maneuver my way to where Abbie Hoffman is, which is in a somewhat secluded area. And I see him, and I'm about 5 feet from him, and I remain about 5 feet from him. And he's holding hands with his wife, Anita, and he's wearing this very expensive white leather jacket with white leather fringe. Now that sets him apart from the average person, and he does that on purpose. It's kind of like a rock star outfit. He's wearing leather cowboy boots, blue jeans, holding his wife's hand, and he walks into this area, and there's probably 8 or 9 or 11 New York City policemen riding horses that have gathered in this small area where Abbie is. And Abbie Hoffman walks in, and I'm checking him out, I'm observing him, because I'm there because I wanted to learn what he's really all about. And he begins provoking and harassing the New York City cops verbally. And he's starting to call them pigs. And he's taunting them. So he's mocking the New York City police. He's calling them pigs. He's taunting them. Now remember a basic principle. Our minds see what they want to see. Our minds believe what they want to believe. And our minds hear what they want to hear. I'm young and naive, and I'm watching this, and on a semi-conscious level. Now, I'm saying semi-conscious because in my adolescent 14-year-old mind, I idolize this guy. He's like a hero. So I have a bias in my perception. But I'm seeing behave in a way that I find I look down upon. To me, that was sleazy. It had no integrity. It was cheap. It was wrong. And all these strong negative emotions about Abbie Hoffman based on his, rotten behavior start to surface in my mind. Because I'm saying to myself, to me, what he's doing, he's totally transparent. The reason he wants to get arrested, the reason he wants to trigger the police to get into some kind of violent confrontation is he knows that he's guaranteed network news television coverage and big New York Times coverage if he can get himself arrested or create some kind of confrontation between him and the police. To me, this is cheap, sleazy, and opportunistic. Okay, but I'm having a problem because you see, even though I'm seeing that, my mind as an adolescent boy is invested in this kind of conscious, this is my hero, type programming. But here's the thing, and this is where I need your prayer in codifying and being able to explain this simply in the book. Because this thing that I'm sharing with you now happened on a regular basis throughout my entire life. And it has a supernatural quality to it, and it has a heightened awareness, heightened perception quality to it. I can remember the actual scene of actually what went down with Abbie Hoffman when I was standing there and the police and the very cheap way he was harassing them. I can remember it. I can smell it. I can see it like it was yesterday. But it happened in 1967. Now, one of the things that I've learned in my life, and Doug Hagman of the Hagman Report helped clarify this to me. He said, Paul, on the air, and he caught me off guard. He said, you have a deidetic memory. Well, I didn't even know what a deidetic memory was. And I do have a form of a photographic memory. If the information that I'm looking at, whether it's visual, auditory, reading, but most often it's a physical reality scenario that I'm involved in or observing. If it is important to me, it will go somewhere in my brain. It'll go into some folder in my brain. And I can retrieve it anytime I want to, or it will just pop up at important times and it will surface, and it's like I can access a video file or whatever, and I can do a playback right in my mind and see everything and the whole thing, and it's like it happened yesterday. And this has happened thousands and thousands and thousands of times in my life. Now, the other part of it is I never forget it. But in order for my brain to function in the photographic memory mode, the subject matter and the content has to be interesting to me. And that was interesting to me. But this is the additional component that I'm having some difficulty with. In addition to the photographic memory being turned on, if what I saw, whenever I saw it, was interesting to me, I found early on that there was like some kind of invisible supernatural force, which I now know to be God, that God would often arrange meetings with people, encounters with people, that God would arrange for me to be in the right place at the right time, that my life and the way my life played out was not based on random chance. That there were so many events that I was part of, so many people that I met, so many things that I encountered, so many experiences that I had, that it's like I stepped into some kind of network, a virtual spiritual network of interconnectedness. And I said, okay, if it interested me, but also if what I was viewing was important to the destiny and the mission and the call that God had given me, God himself, he didn't come down in a white robe, but God himself would turn on the photographic memory app in my brain. He would turn it on. And I wouldn't know why most of the time, or I wasn't even aware that he was doing it most of the time. But he allowed it because he was trying to bring me out of like this matrix world into full-blown truth. And the only way that he could do that was to expose me to truth incrementally over decades. And therefore, he would activate this photographic memory system, and it would stay in a folder in my brain, and then often float up decades later. And I'd remember everything. And this happened constantly. Now, as a writer, I'm wrestling with a simple, entertaining, powerful way to deliver this. It's like in my life, I stepped into an invisible grid, an invisible network. I'll give you another example. I could give thousands. I don't have time. I'm in a library I never go to, in a neighborhood I've almost never been in. And I just happened to walk in this library, and on the in the front of the library, there's tables and books that the library is recommending that people who visit the library read. So the library is showcasing certain books, propping them up so you can see the full cover, and the library, in a sense, is promoting these books. Well, there's this giant, thick book on L. Ron Hubbard, the famous science fiction writer and the founder of Scientology. Now, I have never been a Scientologist, but for some reason, and I believe it was a divine encounter that the Lord arranged for me, it was a brand new book, and it wasn't released by a major publisher, an independent publisher. So I devoured this thick book on L. Ron Hubbard. And there was so much stuff in this book by L. Ron Hubbard that contained doors that would lead to doors that would lead to doors of all kinds of vitally important information for my research that I would never have been able to find any other way. And so by reading this book, it led me to several doors, which opened into other doors, which opened into other doors, which opened into other doors. And these were massive doors of understanding and research that most people have never heard of, and I probably would have spent my entire life never known about it. And if I had never known about all these doors through the L. Ron Hubbard book, I couldn't have found out the truth that I needed to find out. And it gets a lot heavier than that. Deep connections between figures and people in the counterculture I met in New York City, in the East Village, and then they're connected when I live up in Laurel Canyon and Lookout Mountain in the Hollywood Hills, where L. Ron Hubbard, this is in the 80s when I'm producing science fiction feature films and writing my first books. So I'm living up on Lookout Mountain Avenue. I'm living there in the 1980s, producing a science fiction feature film and writing books and exploring the place, et cetera, et cetera. On Lookout Mountain, I'm praying as an intercessory prayer warrior because I'm being trained to do that in Jack Hayford's church, the Church on the Way. But at this point, there's massive secrets literally all around me in Laurel Canyon that I don't find out about until about 10 years after I move out of Laurel Canyon. There's the beginning of the open doors, but I don't quite understand them yet. And so many of the key figures in the formative years of my life, like Aldous Huxley, who wrote Brave New World and Heaven and Hell and the Doors of Perception, where he takes the psychedelic drug mescaline to find the doors of ultimate reality and answers through a higher consciousness. The Doors of Perception by Aldous Huxley was the reason Jim Morrison of The Doors named his rock and roll group The Doors. I didn't know that where I was living was blocks away from where Jim Morrison of the rock and roll group The Doors, the Mamas and the Papas, Frank Zappa, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. I mean, I could go on and on. The Red Hot Chili Peppers. I'm forgetting so many. Oh, major rock and roll. Jackson Browne. I'm forgetting so many major. Janis Joplin, Big Brother and the Holding Company. Jimi Hendrix. George Lucas, the filmmaker. Steven Spielberg, the filmmaker. They all live within walking distance of my house in Lookout Mountain Avenue. So when I would go down to this exercise place, I would run into Timothy Leary, the Harvard LSD prophet, who I had met in the East Village in New York City when I was like 14 years old. And he lives within, several houses of where I live at the same time that I'm there. But it goes deeper than that. When I'm up on Lookout Mountain Avenue in Laurel Canyon, I am hiking. I discovered that Madonna was at the top of Lookout Mountain. And the former governor of California would roar past my house in his giant limousine to visit Madonna. And he also had a house up there. And then I'm hiking, and a lot of the houses up in Laurel Canyon and Lookout Mountain, the houses are close together, and you have much more spacious land in the back of your house or the front of your house. But on the sides of your house, many times the houses are pressed together or there's gates. And there's tremendous views on the other sides of these houses, but the owners don't want tourists and stuff to trample on their property. So I'm hiking very near my house. I mean, practically right. Well, it was right across the street, but I couldn't see it until I hiked up Lookout Mountain Avenue ways, and I see this valley there hidden, but I can't see what's in the valley because the houses are so close together. So I kind of sneak through the space between the two houses, and now I have a completely clear panoramic view of what's in this valley, which is within walking distance from my house. This is in the 80s. And it's a structure that I can't identify because it doesn't make sense. It has like an airplane, landing glass tower, when planes fly in, it's like a airport tower. That's there, and I can't figure out why that's there. There's these like school buses, these large buildings and large like tanks that seem to contain water. I can't figure out what this is. So I guess I make a theoretical guess that I'm looking at some kind of cult compound that some kind of guru owns, and they want to be left alone, and this is their ashram, their meditation center, because that's the only thing this structure could have possibly been, because it didn't fit any description of anything that I would have known about. And I knew it was hidden away to keep it secret. At the time, I never found out what it was. But it was about a decade later, I discover that strange large building with like the airport tower, glass structure around it, I discovered that what I'm looking at is the Lookout Mountain Avenue Laboratory, which was built by the Air Force somewhere between 1941 and 1947. And it's a secret military installation to protect LA from the Nazis, because they started building it in 1941 before World War II was over. But then there are allegations from certain reporters and researchers, allegations which I have not been able to conclusively prove. So I'm not saying this part is true. I put it in a category of allegations. That this Lookout Mountain Avenue Laboratory, because on a factual basis, this is not an allegation, on a factual basis, the Lookout Mountain Avenue Laboratory had massive film production studios. It regularly pulled in something like they produced 19,000 films with big actors in that Lookout Mountain Avenue Laboratory. And I've seen the ID cards of actors and actresses that would go there, like John Wayne, Ronald Reagan, Marilyn Monroe, and on and on and on. And there would be, big people and other ones. But this part, the secondary part, are allegations, and there's allegations that this Lookout Mountain Avenue Laboratory served a secret dual purpose to function as an MK Ultra mind control lab, as well as a massive film studio, etc. Now, again, I put that in the allegations class. But you see, as I do what I call my deep dive research, I find out many, many other things about this area that, at least on a theoretical and hypothetical basis, makes the possibility, however remote, that it was a MK Ultra mind control lab far more plausible. And let me give you the basic thing in a nutshell. One of the researchers, a guy named Dave McGUIRE, wrote a book on the whole thing. And when I was living there in the 1980s, producing a sci-fi film and writing my first books, which were all about exposing the New Age, by the way, I didn't know that literally just a few houses down from me, Robert Heinlein, the great science fiction, the great science fiction author, lived with his wife Leslie. Okay. And he moved in somewhere between 1940. No, excuse me. Yeah. No, he moved in 1936 initially. And then he worked or allegedly worked for the Office of Naval Intelligence. And the Office of Naval Intelligence had a secret project at that time where they got together and hired what they wanted, which was the biggest out of the box thinkers they could find. They called them the kamikaze thinkers, or the kamikaze club. So they sought out the biggest out of the box thinkers they could find, and they determined that these were the big science fiction authors from the golden age of science fiction, because these guys knew a ton about cutting edge science, technology, and they had the ability through their science fiction novels to conceptualize future technologies, future warfare, and all kinds of things that people who have a small box of consciousness, they're programmed to think too timidly. So the guy who was in charge of this secret project was Robert Heinlein, the author of Stranger in a Strange Land and many other best-selling books, science fiction books. Okay, so L. Ron Hubbard, the founder of Scientology and a science fiction novelist, is also part of this out-of-the-box thinkers project run by Naval Intelligence. L. Ron Hubbard moves in and lives with Robert Heinlein in 1947. And this is about 4 or 5 houses down from where I live. We're just there at different times. Isaac Asimov, another great science fiction writer who wrote I, Robot and the Foundation series, lives there. John Campbell, who was part of this out-of-the-box science fiction writers club, and he wrote the screenplay that made the movie, the original movie of The Thing. Okay? Now, what makes this even more interesting, you have these super genius, thinking outside of the box science fiction novelists living there and meeting there on a regular basis, just doors down from where I lived in the 1980s. But then I find out that Aldous Huxley, and by the way, all these science fiction writers had an enormous influence on my life. When I was a young boy growing up in Jackson Heights, Queens, I would borrow these books from the library. Starting at, 10 years old, 11 years old, I was reading the books of all these great science fiction writers that mysteriously turn up meeting or living near my house up in Lookout Mountain. They were a couple of houses down. I mean, what's the probability of that? And that's where I need prayer. I'm trying to summarize this principle here. Now, then I discover through research that Aldous Huxley, or Sir Aldous Huxley, the author of Brave New World, which is about a science fiction dictatorship that rules a futuristic utopia through scientific mind control, genetic engineering, and systematically breaking down the family unit and promoting hypersexuality and hypersexual immorality. Because the purpose of totalitarian governments, which often allow their populations that counterfeit freedom of being able to be hyper sexually immoral, they do that to, number one, shatter the traditional Christian family unit, to shatter traditional moral values, to shatter the concept of an absolute right and an absolute wrong, to shatter any notions of nationalism or patriotism. That's the purpose. The purpose of the explosion of porn, the purpose of the indoctrination. You've seen the reports of mothers and fathers all across the United States who are screaming bloody murder at a school, meeting the school board, in major school districts across the United States, because beginning in first grade, you've got a young child. Turn this down. I don't have time to give you a 10. I'll give you a 5 countdown. But if you've got a young child or this is inappropriate in your eyes, and on the count of 5, I'm going to talk somewhat explicitly, lightly, but explicitly at the same time. So here is a quick warning countdown. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So these parents are outraged, and because they've uncovered proof, they've gotten the textbooks and the videos for themselves to review, and they've discovered that there is a global and national project to indoctrinate with sex education starting in the first grade. So listen to this. Starting in the first grade, they're teaching boys and girls explicitly with photographs and videos, I'm sorry for having to say it, how to masturbate. And then this part here, I heard on a network television show, and forgive me for talking in such explicit language. But remember, I'm warning you about the explicit language that your children are being indoctrinated with. And I don't mean to offend you, but unless I report accurately, there's no way you're going to get it. Because you're going to say, like I probably said initially, oh no, it can't be that bad. So there's 2 books that a mother heard that was in her kid's school. It was so explicit, she couldn't believe it. So she checked the books out for herself and found out that the books were available at numerous local schools near where she lived. And it's explicit. I'm going to soften it a little bit. It's explicit accounts of young boys having triple X-rated explicit sex with adult males. Young boys with adult males, young girls with adult males, and I suppose also young girls with adult females. And this is being read over network news. And the language that they're using is a vulgar and pornographic description of the male sex organ, and the fact that the young boy is having a full spectrum sexual relationship with the adult male that includes fellatio, and you can look it up. Let's just put it this way. It's not appropriate. Okay? The boy is performing fellatio on the male adult, and the male adult is performing fellatio on the young male. And other highly explicit triple X-rated sexual encounters. But it gets deeper than that. It gets into explicit pornographic sadomasochism of all kinds. It gets into sexual orgies with multiple partners. It gets into group sex encounters. This is being taught like we're talking fourth grade, fifth grade, so, and it's explicit XXX photographs, videos. They provide links to X-rated pornographic video sites. They talk about it openly. They have teacher actresses or whatever, that teach the students masturbation and other things. The woman keeps her blue jeans on, but she graphically simulates a bunch of sex acts. I mean, and sex toys, and the use of sex toys. So this is happening all across the United States and all across the world. Now, I get into this in a little bit in my book, Power from On High, because all of this is a globalist effort from the globalist elite. Julian Huxley, who's the brother of Aldous Huxley, helped direct the United Nations organization called UNESCO, which is the UN organization which created Common Core, which was to dumb students down globally and teach them to be happy, smiling citizens of the New World Order. But UNESCO, headed up by Julian Huxley and a whole bunch of other globalist organizations, developed what they called a comprehensive sex education plan that is triple X-rated, hardcore adult pornographic material, where they're indoctrinating children, encouraging them to aggressively participate in all of it, to see if they like it, and they're brainwashing the children into thinking that this is the ultimate normal form of sexuality, the new normal. Okay? That this is how normal adults have sex. And if somebody has sexuality within a marriage that, let's say, is more conventional, that is abnormal. Now, this is part of a globalist elite plan funded by the United Nations, Julian Huxley's brother. So Aldous Huxley wrote Brave New World about a scientific dictatorship. Now, where I'm going with all this is in my book, Power from On High, and also Prophecy, The Future of America, Volume 1 and 2, also The Greatest Battle for the Hearts and Minds of Mankind in the History of the World. I'm exposing the fact that all of these massive changes, like Abbie Hoffman, which as the decades go by, he admits openly that he's a communist, and the same financiers, the globalist elite super capitalist financiers that secretly financed Abbie Hoffman and secretly financed the counterculture and secretly financed Timothy Leary and all these people, and secretly financed Black Lives Matter, secretly financed the riots, the looting, the burning down of stores that happened recently. They are doing this through the occult principle, order out of chaos or manufactured crisis. So Christians have to be educated like now. Like there's no time left, because the order out of chaos principle is accelerating. Review the last 2 years in America and around the world and ask yourself, what kind of major chaos have we had? What kind of major manufactured crises have we had? And it will take you 2 seconds to figure out what mass chaos events have happened in our nation. And then you have to understand that covertly and secretly, they're being used to destroy nationalism and to destroy America and bring in a globalist, occult, one world government. But most Christians are in la-la land, and they're like lambs getting fattened up for the slaughter. We have a job to do. I need your help in reaching people as fast as we can before it's too late. I'm serious, because the day is going to come where people like me will not have the freedom to talk to you. And it'll be over. Okay? It will be over, especially for Christians. Read history. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. I need your help to be an intercessory prayer warrior for me, the ministry, and what we're doing. I need you to aggressively spread our messages far and wide. And finally, I simply ask you to pray to the Lord, ask Him what you can donate and give and contribute financially, whatever the Lord tells you to do. Visit paulmcguire.us. That's paulmcguire.us. I'm telling you, the clock is running out. Just look at the front of my book, Power from On High. There's a clock, a big clock on the front of it. It tells you. There's a message on the front cover of Power from On High. You'll see the symbols. You cannot miss them. I'm saying something in the images on the front cover. Go to paulmcguire.us and look at it. Look at the symbols and images that I placed on the front cover. There is a warning, a watchman's warning. The trumpet's blowing, and I'm communicating in every way I can, but I can't do it alone. God bless you. This is Paul McGuire. Visit paulmcguire.us.